Okay, it looks like we are Gucci. Um, just rearrange a couple things. It says we're live now. I didn't get a notification from my phone, but I trust that we are live now. So, all right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this presentation on Attack on Titan and René Girard. My name is Paul Perdocoda, and I got my boys here, Gabe Beltrain and Nelson. So, two Attack on Titan scholars. I know practically zip of Attack on Titan beyond what the show kind of presented to me, and but I'm the Gerard guy, and we'll sort of just bounce off of each other throughout this entire presentation. So, Nelson, Gabe, you want to introduce yourself? Starting with you, Nelson.
My name is Nelson. I am a college graduate and I am obsessed with Attack on Titan. Very excited to get into this discussion today.
Nice, nice. How about you, Gabe?
My name is Gabe. I'm still currently in college, and I've watched Attack on Titan. And yeah, let's get in this.
Yeah, my name is Paul Pardocoda. I was political science and religious studies major at the College of the Holy Cross. I'm enthusiast in Rene Girard's thoughts, specifically on mimetic desire and the scapegoating mechanisms. But yeah, suffice it to say, Attack on Titan blew me away, and enough for me to create this presentation. I think there's a lot here that can be learned from and discussed in terms of Gerard and sort of the ramifications his theory might weigh on Attack on Titan. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So this is the title for the presentation, Rene Girard and the Scapegoat and Attack on Titan. Before we jump right in, though, I have to give a list of reading recommendations. Hang on, let me just edit the. There we go. I have a little list of reading recommendations to give to you guys. So particularly the Scapegoat by Rene Girard. I still have this copy here. Basically outlines the most important points of Rene Girard, his mimetic theory and his theories on the scapegoat and mechanisms. I've also read Things Hidden Since the Foundation of the World and Violence and the Sacred. I will confess I did not read I See Satan Fall Like Lightning and Battling to the End, which are the middle and the far right titles here. But some of the points that I do draw upon do come from those two books. And obviously, no one's going to have enough time to read all of Gerard's work. So I also have a couple of video recommendations for you to check out. So there's this excellent lecture series by Jonathan B. on Rene Girard's mimetic theory, as well as an interview with Girard himself called The Scapegoat, which is a five-part CBC ideas series with David Cayley. And basically outlines everything that you need to know about Girard's mimetic theory and the scapegoating mechanisms. But you probably don't know what I'm even talking about. Who is this Girard? Who is the scapegoating mechanisms? What is this mimetic theory? And I will get into that. And there's a lot to unpack before we even get into Attack on Titan and Girard's theory. So right now, I kind of want to start with what Attack on Titan even is. So most of you guys have seen the anime. If you're here watching this video, you already know what goes down. Everything's already, played out and spoiled. But for the one or two of you that are still out there that haven't seen the anime, I want to rely on Nelson to outline the plot of Attack on Titan, at least the most important parts. So, Nelson, you want to take over? Tell us why we're here.
Absolutely. So,
Oh
Attack
yeah.
on Titan is a very intricate story. Uh, Possibly one of the better shows I've ever watched. Uh, Lots and bits and pieces to it. But the big gist of it is that the cycle of violence never ends. Uh, Throughout the story, we are left guessing on who the actual enemy really is, and it's not until the closing end where we find that it doesn't really matter because our main character becomes the villain that he was fighting to defeat, all in the name of saving the ones he loved, scapegoated himself to become the enemy that humanity has to band together to defeat. Yeah,
Cool.
that's basically the gist of it.
Nice, cool, cool. And there's three important plot points, right, in this show that I kind of want to focus on. So you brought up scapegoating, but we'll go through this roadmap here, which is the role of Emir as the foundational murder in this mythos that Isayama, the author of Attack on Titan, sort of set up. There's the conflict between Ymir's scapegoated descendants, so the Eldians, and basically the entire world, particularly the Marlians, as we'll discuss later, but generally the world. And then three, as Nelson pointed out, is basically the entirety of Eren Yeager's arc is gets Girard's pulse pumping. So, Nelson, do you want to add anything to any of these roadmaps here, or like sort of like an appetizer to set us up, if you have any?
Can't really think of anything for right now, but I'll definitely jab in if I come up with anything.
Oh yeah, hell yeah. So, Gabe, how about you? You have anything to say?
I mean, other than just thinking that you yourself can never be a villain, you'll always be a
Mhm.
villain in someone else's eyes.
Sure, sure, absolutely. Perspective is a very, very fascinating point that we'll definitely get into, particularly with regards to the Eldians. Certainly Amir, but the Eldians in particular. You know, one of the things that took me aback, and we'll get into this later about this show, was how the show plays around with perspective. So you always think you're in the right no matter what, but you don't feel yourself being contradictory or conflicted about one side or the other. So, all right, we'll jump right in. So first, we'll talk about Amir, then the Eldians, who are her descendants, and then Eren Yeager's arc. So, yeah. So first off, we have to discuss this mimetic theory that Girard lines out. So basically, to summarize Girard's biography of his philosophy, he started out in the literary field before he got into religious studies. So he analyzed the works of Shakespeare, Dostoevsky, and Proust, and what he essentially found was a dynamic of human desire. What he found about human desire is that it's often triangular and mimetic. So what that means essentially is your desire is not your own authentic desire. It's learned from other people. So it's you believing that you have this authentic desire in your heart, but it's in fact a desire that you learn from other people. So you imitate other people's desires. And there's different kinds of desires that Girard lines out. So there's the physical desire, which is basically desire of objects in and of themselves. So you desire, gold or jewels or, stuff like that, like vain things. But there's also metaphysical desire. So you desire objects or you desire certain things for what they say about your ego, what they say about you. So for our purposes here, for analyzing Attack on Titan, the object of desire is this abstract notion of power, this abstract acquisition of power. So as we'll analyze through King Fritz, specifically how this desire ultimately leads the world through the Eldians to spiral into a constant cycle of tragedy and violence. Um, so what this inevitably leads to, as I said, the desire for power leads to conflict. There's got to be other powers that want power, right? That conflict with you, desiring power. So there's three actors in this triangular and mimetic form of desire. So there's the object itself, there's the mediator, and then there's the subject, right? So there's you, the subject, looking at the object because the mediator wants that object. So you desire the object through the mediator. So that's how you desire um, uh, the way that other people desire, right? So inevitably, this leads to conflict, as we've already established. And what this eventually leads to is, all right, all this violence is causing people to look for answers as to who started this violence. And obviously, no one wants to take accountability, right? So this leads to people wanting to search out a single victim, right? To say, all right, I don't want to be guilty of this violence that you and I have caused. So why don't we look for someone that is, we think, is definitely guilty of our misfortunes, right? So they look to a scapegoat, someone who they arbitrarily assign all the community's blame to, right? So essentially, this leads to the scapegoating of a single victim, right? And we reconstitute society at the expense of the single victim. So we feel this rush of solidarity and come together as ersatz whole. So even though we were once fighting each other, no matter how much we hate each other, there's a line that we don't cross, and that line is drawn across the slit throat of the scapegoat. So it is precisely because of this effect of bringing people together and seemingly solving the problem that this scapegoating mechanism, this unconscious mechanism, tends to be sacralized, right? People say it's a good thing, and God or the gods smile upon it, right? And just as important in this mechanism is the complicity of the scapegoat themselves, right? So there's two ways that the scapegoat can be complicit, as outlined in The Scapegoat by René Girard, which is this book right here. So there's negative complicity, but there's also positive complicity as well. So otherwise called the negative phase and positive phase of mimesis. So negative complicity is when the scapegoat basically fulminates and says that they don't deserve the wrath that is being exacted upon themselves. And so they basically condemn the persecutors. So in a way, that's further perpetuating the cycle of violence. You're perpetuating and feeding back into the violence that is being perpetrated against you. So you're proving the point of the persecutor by saying, hey, you deserve to die for killing me. And in saying that you deserve to die for killing me, you're perpetuating the anger, the violence, the hatred that feeds into this cycle of violence. Positive complicity is when the scapegoat says, oh, yes, I fully deserve this. I definitely am, the cause of all the evils that is happening in our society. So this is a further perpetuation of the scapegoating mechanism. So it's sort of like a catch-22. You lose either way. Whether you hate your persecutors and condemn them, like outwardly, they just tried, basically exact wrath against them. But at the same time, you succumb to the perspective of the persecutor. You die either way. You're still a scapegoat. If you can agree or condemn the perspective of the other persecutor, you're feeding into this cycle no matter what. So that is the mimetic role that the scapegoat themselves basically feeds into. And I know this all sounds a bit abstract, but some notable examples of this include the Garden of Eden, Oedipus, and Jesus himself. So in the Garden of Eden, this is a particular example of the triangular and mimetic form of human desire, right? And there's a Bible verse here. Let me just move my face down here a little bit. Second. I'll just move it here in the meantime. So to take the first Garden of Eden example here, which is Genesis, Eve didn't want to eat from the garden, from the fruit of knowledge of good and evil, from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the forbidden fruit, until the serpent told her so. So Adam and Eve were just fine in the Garden of Eden until the serpent communicated the desire to be like God through the fruit itself. So the serpent is the mediator. Adam and Eve are the subject, and the fruit of knowledge is the object itself. And the object itself is not a physical desire. It could be an apple, it could be anything. It's the metaphysical desire for Adam and Eve to be like God. So it's the godlike desire that drove Adam and Eve to eat from the forbidden fruit, as communicated by the serpent. So that is the triangular way of human desire. And mimesis, it should be notified, to move on to Oedipus now, is not merely imitation. It is basically succumbing to a perspective that is ultimately destructive. So Oedipus himself was not imitating other people's desires in persecuting himself, because he was the one that caused the plague and all the horrible things that happened to the Greek city-state of Thebes in that time. He basically agreed with the perspective of this persecutor, saying, hey, you caused all these evil things to happen because you killed your father and had sex with your mother. So mimesis in the story of Oedipus is essentially him agreeing with the perspective of the persecutors, even though it's not right. It's entirely wrong that he caused the plague in the Greek city-state of Thebes. So mimesis is not mere imitation. It's an agreement, as it were, with a perspective. So and in acting in accordance as such. So if the people tell Oedipus to exile himself, and Oedipus does so, he's not imitating other people. He's basically agreeing with that perspective. So that is mimesis itself. You're agreeing with a perspective that is arbitrary and destructive. And there's no better example, I would say, of the scapegoating mechanism itself, as outlined in Oedipus and other foundational myths, than the Gospels, which in Jesus's time, in John chapter 11, verse 50, when Jesus is before the Sanhedrin, which is the council of Pharisees, for just before, the night before his crucifixion, before his passion, the Pharisee Caiaphas said, "Nor consider that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and that the whole nation perish not." There it is. So that is Caiaphas and his Pharisees saying it is better that Jesus, one guy, should die than let him cause all disorder to run rampant in our nation of Israel, in the Roman Empire. So let us all come together and try to save our nation by killing this one dude, by killing Jesus. So that is the scapegoating mechanism. We have to constitute ourselves at the expense of a single victim. And as we will reveal later on in this presentation, what's unique about Jesus as a scapegoat, in contrast to Oedipus, is that Jesus was neither positively or negatively complicit in the perspective of his persecutors. He was silent before Pontius Pilate. He was silent before Caiaphas for a little while, but then he said, "I am." But he didn't condemn, and he didn't agree with the perspective that he has to be murdered. So, but whereas Oedipus basically said, "Yes, I did all these horrible things. I should exile myself." So that is how Jesus is different from most other foundational myths of the scapegoats. And this is how we jump in to Attack on Titan. And before we move on to you, Nelson, I do want to play this video, which basically it's 4 minutes long, that outlines, well, not outlines. It basically shows the. Oh, hang on, let me move around here. Oh shoot! Oh, for some reason, it's not letting me move my. Oh, here we go. Oh, darn. I cut off there for a sec. Yeah, so this video is a backstory to Emir Fritz, who is the foundational scapegoat, I would say, of Attack on Titan. Am I correct in that assessment, Nelson? Would you say that?
Yes.
All right. So let me play this for. It's only a 4-minute clip, but I think it'll save us a lot of time in trying to basically exposition dump who she is. So let's play this.
女の子らしくって何？そうだね。女の子らしくっていうのはこの子みたいな女の子のことかな。ヒストリアもこの子が好きでしょ？うん。いつも他の人を思いやってる優しい子だからね。
I should mention it jumps around a little bit.
世界は辛くて厳しいことばかりだからみんなから愛される人になって助け合いながら生きていかなきゃいけないんだよ。
この中に豚を逃がした者がいる。全員から片目をくり抜く。奴隷に目玉は2つもいらぬ。よかろう。お前は自由だ。 道を開き荒れ地を耕し峠に橋を架けた。褒美だ。我の子種をくれてやる。何をしておる。起きよ。お前がやりごときで死なぬことは分かっておる。食え、娘たちよ。の力を引き継ぐのだ。ユミルの体をすべて食い尽くせ。マリア、ローゼ、シーナ、娘たちよ。子を産み増やし続けよ。その背骨は子から子へ。
All right, Nelson. Tell me, what did we just see there?
We saw basically the gist of Emir's backstory.
Mhm.
She was a slave who had freed a pen of pigs. She understood she was a slave, seeing those pigs, multiple times throughout the series. Eren brings up the fact that the people inside the walls on the island of Parody have the mindset of livestock. And I think it was pretty cool to see her as a slave give freedom to those who aren't able to achieve it. But beyond that, she came into contact with the Titan powers, and from then on, the original King Fritz essentially just loved her as a weapon.
Yep.
Cultivating the roads.
Yep.
All that sort of things, all in the name of the nation of Eldia.
You also forgot that she ended up becoming a weapon of warfare for the.
Yeah, he said that.
For the Eldians.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, she was weaponized. Yeah. What? Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Just one more thing. After death, she was sent to the metaphysical plane called the Paths.
Yep.
Where she spent possibly billions of years. Just continuing to being a slave.
Through time dilation. So historically it happened 2,000 years, but the time works differently in the coordinates. So billions of years for her perspective. Am I correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, no, absolutely. When I first saw it, this is the episode that made me scream. I had to say something in terms of like interpreting it through Girard's point of view. Because I think, along with Plague Tale Requiem, I think this is probably the best representation of the scapegoating mechanisms as outlined by Girard I've ever seen in any medium. And what struck me about Ymir was how literal she was as a scapegoat. So Ymir was cast out, set quote unquote free into the wilderness, only to be hunted down for sport, which was exactly the same way that ancient Jews cast out a he-goat from the walls of Jerusalem to be killed after transferring all the sins of Israel onto the animal. So the community of Eldians in that time collectively assigned blame for the freedom of the pigs to Ymir. And I know the show probably leaves it a bit ambiguous as to who actually set the pigs free, but in the manga, it was definitely Ymir, right?
There was a clip from the show towards the.
Okay.
Yeah, that shows her freeing the pigs and walking away with a smile on her face.
Well, be that as it may, the fact that she freed the pigs and everyone collectively had no hesitation to basically point out that it was this little girl, because they were all scared of Emir Fritz's violence. You know, they all collectively chose to concentrate all the violence of the community against Emir. Shows just how much of a scapegoat she truly was in that community. So, but essentially, after she was exiled, Emir was meant to be this foundational murder in the metaphysical order of the Eldian race, right? So the walls that surround Paradise in concentric rings. Paradise is basically the island where the Eldians live, you know, in exile, which serve as the foundations of Eldian existence and mythology, are named after Emir's daughters. So Maria, Rose, and Sina are the names of the walls that basically hide all the titans that eventually lead to the rumbling, which is basically the apocalypse down the line. So the same daughters that consumed her flesh to perpetuate the Titan's power, essentially. And cannibalism is a common theme in a lot of the myths that Girard analyzes, in that in consuming the flesh of the scapegoat, you take in their power. And this paradigm of power is what we will analyze later on. So keep that in mind, bookmark that. Power is the essential component key to the scapegoating mechanism here, at least in Attack on Titans. So, but there's a question that is begged here. If she was godlike in power, but she was still a slave, what was her condition, right? So in a recent short film, I think was Attack on Titan Requiem originally like a fan manga? Nelson, correct me if I'm wrong here.
I don't think so, because the announcement of them animating it was the first I've ever heard of it.
Okay, interesting. Because I remember it's a short film on YouTube, Attack on Titan Requiem. The creator of that short film said that he based it on another alternative timeline manga for Attack on Titan. But essentially, Attack on Titan Requiem features a dialogue from Zeke Yeager, who's Eren Yeager's brother, who's reflecting on Emir's power and why, you know, she had so much power, but she couldn't use it to free herself. So he says, quote, "It was clear that there was no limit to her power. Could it then have been her own will? Was she unable to separate her desires from those of the king? Or was she still connected to the world she left behind?" So what is key here, in both of those prongs, is Emir sought a sense of belonging somewhere. So whether it was belonging with the king or belonging with this world that she left behind, she sought a sense of belonging. So she sought this metaphysical being, you know, this metaphysical desire to belong somewhere, anywhere. But she belonged nowhere because she was banished to the coordinate out of her own love, her sense of love for the person who persecuted her. Right? Nelson, do you have any thoughts about this? How Emir was enslaved in this metaphysical realm, like a purgatory, right? So she was banished literally to be killed after she was arbitrarily blamed, well, not arbitrarily blamed for freeing the pigs, but also after she died, she basically banished herself to the coordinate, which is this metaphysical realm, right?
And she was still a slave even after death.
Exactly. And why was she still a slave?
All in the name of love.
All in the name of love. She had this desire to be with King Fritz. So she thought that she wanted what King Fritz wanted, right? But what she didn't see, what she didn't realize, is King Fritz, as you said, Nelson, loved her as a weapon. Whereas Emir wanted to love him as a person, King Fritz only loved her as a weapon. It was only a one-way love. And she was positively complicit in the perspective of her own persecutor, to the point where she was developing an emotional dependence on him. So in developing that emotional dependence on King Fritz, she also had essentially been enslaved to his descendants, who are also her descendants. So she was enslaved to the wills of her descendants because she was enslaved to the will of King Fritz. So there is that positive complicity in the perspective of her persecutor, the mimetic desire to be with King Fritz, her mimesis for King Fritz. That was what kept her in prison. After death, she was in that state of limbo, which was so honestly kind of poignant for me. You know, it kind of, you know, that's why she's my favorite character in the show. Like, you know, people ask me why. You know, why not Eren? Why not Armin? No, because her as an archetype is so unique, and so perfectly emblematic of Girard's scapegoating mechanism. But there's one thing that's still kind of confusing, both about Girard and about the role Ymir plays, which is basically, why is Ymir a god, but also vilified in the show? Nelson or Gabe, if you want to jump in as well, what do you guys think? Why is Ymir both vilified and deified in the show?
I believe
Nelson?
it was through her acts while she was still alive. You know, in the show, we see a clip of King Fritz ordering her to take out the Marlians.
Yeah.
And why the Marlians specifically hate them the most. They have their own internment camps for the Eldians inside their own country. Just treat them awfully. I won't get into some of the things they do to them.
Of course.
It is bad.
Yeah, no. There's certainly a lot of Holocaust imagery. We'll get to that when we talk about the Eldian race themselves. But you're absolutely right. It mostly has something to do with what Ymir did when she was still alive. But Girard has an answer to this. This very interesting conundrum as to how people viewed Ymir and how we should view Ymir, which is this paradigm that we talked about of power. So the axiom through which the scapegoat's power is analyzed is not good or evil, but powerful and powerless. So the power to do both good and evil is power to do anything at all, which is desirable. So King Fritz, you saw in that clip, he basically outcast Ymir, but then did a complete 180 and married her. Why? Because she got this power to do good and evil for conquest, right? So the axiom through which a scapegoat's power should be analyzed is power, not good or evil. This is not to say that power or good or evil didn't exist in the pagan world in modern times, in our real world. But the primary axiom through which any imperative action was taken was power, not good or evil. This is why Aristotle and Plato made such a big deal about basing the foundations of the state on virtue, on doing good, because the paradigm in that time was power, not virtue, like Aristotle and Plato insisted, but power, the power to do things that are effective. So that is the paradigm through which the scapegoat has to be analyzed. And that is why the scapegoat was deified. So the scapegoating process is basically what Girard says here in The Violence and the Sacred, the deification of the scapegoat. Quote, because human thought has never succeeded in grasping the mechanism of violent unanimity, it naturally turns towards the victim and seeks to determine whether he is not somehow responsible for the miraculous consequences of his own death or exile. Because the violence directed against the victim was intended to restore order and tranquility, it seems only logical to attribute the happy result to the victim himself. End quote. So that's from his book, The Violence and the Sacred. Power is key here in analyzing why the scapegoat is deified, why the scapegoat is venerated. It's the same reason why Oedipus was respected even after he was exiled. People started to invite Oedipus into their homes because they saw his power to inflict plagues, to enact such divine, horrifying powers as something desirable. Even though his power wasn't good or evil, it was power nonetheless to do anything, which is desirable. Power for conquest, power for influence. So power is the main driving force for the scapegoating mechanism. And that's precisely why King Fritz was so is the real villain in the show. I'd say his desire was emblematic of what Saint Augustine described as the libido dominandi, the lust for power. That's the nature of sin. The nature of pride is the libido dominandi, the lust for control, for power. That is the essence, the bread and butter of the scapegoating mechanism. Power. I'm telling you. Gabe, Nelson, you have anything else to say to that?
I think you killed it, honestly.
Yeah. It's honestly, when King Fritz married Ymir and insisted that his kids, her kids, I should call them her kids because fuck that king. The reason why he had her kids eat Ymir is because he wanted her power to go on. Her power was what he desired, not her. Her power. He married Ymir because he wanted her power for
Not only
Titan.
that,
For
not
all
only
of time too.
Yeah.
not only that, but I'm sure he wasn't like aware that the spine passing on, like consuming spinal fluid, would transfer the powers to the next shifter.
Yeah.
So I'm sure he was trying anything and everything to get Emir's powers back,
Yeah.
even by means of having his daughters eat their mom.
Absolutely depraved. When it goes to show you how deep this depravity can go when you want power enough. So he'll go beyond good or evil. Ymir was beyond good or evil, according to the king. As long as she had the power, he was in control. And as long as she was enslaved, her will was enslaved to his desire, he was always in control, which is honestly some evil shit there. So, but I also kind of want to discuss sort of the mythos that Isayama based the whole world of Attack on Titan. So, kind of want to go a bit into Indo-European religions. So, he kind of based it goes without saying a lot of the aesthetic of Attack on Titan on Germanic folklore and customs. But and it should be noted that Isayama, very clearly took profound inspiration from Germanic and Norse mythology in creating the world of Attack on Titan. Ymir enters a tree of life, which is the Yggdrasil, and becomes the first Titan. Yggdrasil connects the 9 realms in Germanic and Nordic mythology, including Jotunheim, where the giants live. So Ymir's original name, I think, was Orgelmil. He was considered the first being in history, and according to some legends, some giants are also able to see into the future. So I think it's pretty fair to say that Isayama based a lot of this mythos of Attack on Titan on Germanic paganism, right?
Yeah.
But yeah.
Say yep.
But I also want to belabor the point of the way that the god that Ymir was based on, right? So this is a quote from an Edda, which is basically a folk tale from Nordic and Germanic, Indo-European religion called the Snorri Sturluson Edda. So I'm just gonna read this verbatim. It's basically how Ymir created the world, basically through his body, and it's a dude in pagan religion, I should say. So Bor's son, so Odin, Vili, and Ve killed the giant Ymir, took Ymir and transported him to the middle of Ginnungagap. Oh God, I hope I said that right. And out of him made the world, out of his blood and the sea and the lakes. The earth was made of the flesh, and the rocks of the bones. Stone and scree they made out of the teeth and molars, and of the bones that had been broken. They also took his skull and made out of it the sky, and set it up over the earth with 4 points. And under each corner they set a dwarf. From Ymir's flesh was earth created, and from blood, sea, rocks of bones, trees of hair, and from his skull the sky, and from his eyelashes the joyous gods made Midgard for men's sons, and from his brains were those cruel clouds created. So in original Germanic paganism, Ymir was the foundation of the world, much like an Attack on Titan. This is Girard's point, that the scapegoat, as a god, is the foundation of the world, of the paradigm through which people perceived existence itself. So, and this, a very similar strain is seen in Hindu mythology through Purusha. And this strain, likely has a common missing link as they're both Indo-European religions, right? So I think it speaks for itself here, right? That Ymir's death, her role as the founding Titan, as the foundational murder, created the paradigm through which the Eldians and the world itself basically perceived themselves and perceived the world, right? And there's another interesting way of sort of looking at this. Oh, I'm sorry, Gabe Nelson. Do you want to say something to this?
I don't really have anything to add yet.
Okay. How about you, Gabe? You're the scholar of God of War here.
I mean, I think you kind of encapsulated it pretty well.
Okay. So there's there's a little bit more I kind of want to flush out here. I'm sorry, I'm doing most of the talking, guys, but this is Girard here, and
The Girard expert.
we'll get into the Eldians and the and Aaron Yeager specifically. We still haven't gotten to the meat and potatoes quite just yet, but there is a phenomenology of sacrificial violence. So this idea I got from an article I read from a journal called Contagion, which is basically the official journal of René Girard's mimetic theory, called After Sacrifice Ontology. So the shared revelatory dynamic of Heidegger and Girard. So he analyzed Anthony W. Bartlett here, the scholar, analyzed Heidegger's phenomenology through Girard's theory of mimesis and mimetic desire and scapegoating, right? And he said something very fascinating here that I kind of want to outline here verbatim. So he said, differentiation produces identity. At the same moment, the event of differentiation of beings is itself occluded, so that it appears beings were always, quote, already there. Something unparalleled yet unobservable must have happened among the hominid observers of being to produce the beings that were already there. This phenomenology both recalls the founding event of being, sees the occlusion as an essential element of that event, and yet points out the occlusion. The very act of meaning, or of symbolicity, is a displacement of violence onto and into the being, which thus arrives at a metaphysical something. So a tree, a dog, and a rock become a tree and a dog and a rock, something with fixed meaning, when the founding violence against the victim or its sacrificial repetition projects foundational differentiation on these things. Metaphysics can be understood, in fact, as this original sacred displacement. Our human universe, and this is key here, our human universe is made metaphysically out of original violence and the false objectifying truth that it brings. So that was Anthony W. Bartlett in his article, which I can't recommend enough. The point being here, I know I threw a lot at you right here, but the sacrifice of the scapegoat essentially creates the paradigm through which we can perceive objects, through which we can perceive real tangible things. Everything that you can touch and see is defined through the way violence is filters your consciousness, right? So distantly, in our distant ancestral past, our ancestors killed someone, right? And this created a neurosis that was perpetuated down throughout the ages that continues to define the way we see the world. We see the world as sacrificial violence, metaphysical violence. So the coordinate in Attack on Titan is that metaphysical realm that binds all Eldians in a collective subconscious, the collective subconscious of Ymir's death, of Ymir's violence, the violence perpetuated against Ymir. Ymir is the unconscious paradigm through which the Eldians perceive the world. So violence has always been the way that the Eldians view the world. The walls themselves are the way. That's all the world they've ever seen. That's the world that Aaron Yeager wants to break out of. He wants to break out of this violent paradigm. But in so doing, as we'll get into later, he's actually perpetuating that violent paradigm, and he just doesn't see it. So the paradigm, the subconscious of the human universe is the scapegoat. That's the point that Anthony Bartlett here was making, that Girard was making here. So the metaphysics itself, the way we talk about metaphysics, is sacrificial violence. And that's Ymir right there from Attack on Titan, which I think is so staggering with what the way that Attack on Titan presents it. So Nelson, Gabe, you have anything to add to this about Ymir specifically?
Go ahead, Nelson.
Not yet?
I'll let you know when I do.
Okay, bet.
Jump in.
All right. But actually, I do want you to jump in for this next slide, which is basically the role that the Eldian race plays. So now that we've sort of outlined the way that the Eldians have defined their own existence, their own being, You know, now we have to sort of have to understand how they reckon with the role they play in this world. So one of the things that took my breath away about this show was how it played around with perspective. So at the beginning, Nelson, you were there when we were watching Attack on Titan with me. I was relishing the fact that some of the characters in the show that committed the horrific act against the Eldians were suffering grisly deaths or were just suffering generally. So I really enjoyed Zeke suffering. I enjoyed Bertold eating the dust. I enjoyed all these people dying because, you know, hey, they killed our bros, they killed our homies, right? But later on, when it's revealed that Eren had this hidden ability to literally unleash the Book of Revelation against the entire planet, when our main party started working for those who were up until that point the antagonists, you asked me, is what Mikasa, Armin, and the others doing to these Eldians justified? And then I said, they have to do what they have to do to save the world, right? You know, they have to kill a couple of Eldians, so what? Big whoop. And then you pointed out, Nelson, that this was the perspective of the antagonist during the first half of the show. And that kind of took my breath away. What?
Reiner and Bertolt.
Yeah. This was the perspective of right.
Same exact position.
Yeah.
Conversation between Eren and Reiner so much in the basement.
Mm-hmm.
Eren is having this conversation with Reiner past, like, after understanding that he's about to do exactly what Reiner had to do.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating the way the show plays around with perspective, and I kind of wanted to highlight some quotes here that I think perfectly encapsulate. Other than Emir's character, these quotes perfectly encapsulate Girard's bread and butter of the scapegoating mechanism. So Eren Yeager says, right now, the nations of the world are united in their desire to exterminate my people. And then Hanji Zoe, who is a scout, which is an elite squad of fighters in Attack on Titan, who are fighting the Titans, or the Giants. The world needs Paradise, which is the home of the Eldians, to be the root of all evil. They think that shared attitude brings them all together, protecting global stability. And then Commander Dot Pixis, probably the most iconic line in the show for me. I know, Nelson, you might disagree with me here. Humanity required an enemy greater than itself just to survive. Humanity constantly needs a scapegoat just as a crutch to define itself. That's what took my breath away here. And Nelson, did you say something else?
I know. I was just agreeing that that quote is very, very good.
Yeah. Absolutely. So that we
I like too is
sure.
that when Pixis had said this to Eren for the very first time, Eren disagreed with him, saying, you know, the Titans are here, but here we are, still grabbing at each other's necks. Later on in the story, however, complete 180, he understands that he has to become the scapegoat and bring all this devastation to the rest of the world to keep his people and his friends safe.
Absolutely. So at the beginning of the show, in a way, Eren Yeager was negatively complicit with the Titans themselves, but became positively complicit with the Titans themselves and negatively complicit with the rest of the world, who are the actual persecutors of the Eldians. So Eren Yeager was negatively complicit with who he thought were the antagonists, the Titans, but then became positively complicit with the Titans to be negatively complicit with the rest of the world. So it's sort of like he's moving like this. You can't see my webcam, but you know that's the way it's kind of moving. So like inchworming. So the main takeaway here of the role that the Eldians play is that we follow the perspectives of characters who are always negatively complicit or positively complicit in the perspectives of the persecutors. Just shows how unaware we, the viewer, are in this perspective change. You don't feel it. I didn't feel it until Nelson pointed it out to me that, hey, you know, you hated these guys at the beginning. Now you're agreeing with them. So I think that just is just staggering. You know, you have to take a step back and remove yourself from the perspective of this show and see, wow, holy shit. You know, everyone hears this villain. Yeah.
That's why my second time watching this show was just as good, if not better, than watching it.
100%. 100%. Gabe, you've been awful quiet. You have anything else to add here?
Hold on.
Oh, shoot. going on with Gabe?
I think he muted his mic.
Okay. Well, anyway, but we don't have to talk about it here, Nelson, if you feel comfortable. But sort of the way that the Eldians are portrayed outside of parody, so in the Marleyan side, is very um, it's very Holocausty, I'd say, in the imagery. So
And
sort
not
of the
only that,
ghettos.
but a step forward, even fellow Eldians that are not on the island of Paradis
Mhm.
hate the Eldians on the island of Paradis.
Oh,
They've been trained, they've been propagandized to
Yeah.
hate their own people.
yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. But also to hate themselves, right?
Yes,
In a way.
to
Yeah.
just fill them with guilt for stuff their ancestors did upwards of 2,000 years ago.
Positive complicity. Positive complicity with the perspective of the persecutor, right there. Textbook positive complicity. So they are fighting back against themselves through the other people. So that is textbook positive complicity with the perspective of the persecutor, of the scapegoat. Even if the scapegoat was actually responsible for some of the horrific things the ancestors did, um, the fact that they are continuously scapegoated because they're not their ancestors, the fact that they're continuously scapegoated just shows how much they need the Eldians. The Marleyans need the Eldians to basically keep order, essentially. They outcast them to ghettos and basically enslave them in the war machine to continue on with civilization, right? So that is basically the role of the Eldian race, I'd say there. And now we move on to the real meat and potatoes. Gabe, Nelson, you know who I'm bringing up. You know who he is. Does he even need an introduction at this point?
My goat.
He's the goat himself, the hero, the
Absolutely.
villain, the
Hell
protagonist,
freaking
and
yeah.
the antagonist
Did
with
Hell
his own
nothing
story.
wrong.
did nothing wrong. We'll see
I would
about
have done
that.
the same thing if I
Morally,
had those
the
powers.
absolute worst. Completely
well,
understandable.
well, no one completely understandable is 100%. I agree with you there. But yeah, no. I'd say Rene Girard would have a lot of things to say about our boy Aaron here. And here's where I kind of want to talk about the way that Aaron um, talks or influences the other characters in the show, right? So the role of Aaron Yeager here. Aaron Yeager, I'd say, represents the extreme that is complete opposite of Amir, the complete other end of Amir, where she was positively complicit in the perspective of her persecutor, the perspective of King Fritz. He is so negatively complicit. You see it throughout the entire show. He wants vengeance against the Titans. He wants vengeance against the Marleyans, against the world for basically treating the Eldian race as cattle, right? He wants absolute vengeance. But here, before I get into it, because I have so much fucking things to say about Aaron here, Nelson, Gabe, what do you have to say about our goat here? What do you have to say?
I think he had to do what he had to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that with great power comes great responsibility to protect your own.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In my opinion, when it came down to it, he had put his faith in his friends to come up with a solution that wouldn't be the destruction of the world. Because obviously, he hated what he had to do.
Sure.
When walking around in Marley, he saw families. I remember a manga panel where he looked at a family, well, pregnant mom, young kid already, dad,
Mm-hmm.
and he thought to himself, what would mother think of this?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But as it turns out, he had killed his own mom to set him on the path,
yeah,
to give him
dude,
motivation
Well,
to do
his
everything he
future
did.
self.
dude. Oh my God, Nelson, you just hit on one of my favorite points. I have a list here. I'm just gonna go down it, and you are gonna. I gotta pounce on that, Nelson, real quick. But Nelson, please finish your point. Finish your point, please. Oh.
I think that pretty much sums up the point, unless I'm
Mm.
missing something. Something might click while you're
Okay, sure, absolutely. Gabe, were you saying something? I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I mean, he ends up becoming his. How do I want to say this?
His own
He
worst
is the
nightmare.
catalyst to his own story
Okay.
in the most literal of senses.
True. Absolutely. So here is the role that Eren Yeager plays, in my opinion. He is the serpent that communicates violence to the most pivotal characters in the show. As the serpent communicated the desire for godlike power to Adam and Eve in Eden. So he communicates mimetic contagion to his father Grisha. Even though that happened in the past, he was the one that communicated the idea of violence, of taking the founding titan from the Rice family, who was the royal family that had the founding titan from Ymir. He communicated that desire, or that will to power, to Grisha from the past. So, to the past, from the future. So he communicates it to Mikasa as well, thereby forcing her to retroactively reframe the paradigm through which she views the world as cruel and inimical, right? The world becomes a pure cycle of violence in her mind. She saw the grasshopper or the mantis eating the moth in the flower. She saw nothing of it. She saw her father killing that duck or goose, and immediately thought, oh yeah, the world is cruel, even though up until that point it was just a fact of life. She retroactively reframed their view of the world as violence because of Eren telling her to fight back. Not to say that she didn't have cause to, right? She was kidnapped by human traffickers, right? She had to defend herself ultimately, but she was forced by Eren to reframe her entire worldview, to basically warp it in through a paradigm of violence to survive, right? Whereas it's not just self-defense, it's just pure violence. She didn't need to go that far, but she did because of Eren. And he communicates this violence to Ymir, thereby starting the rumbling and convincing her to become negatively complicit in the perspective of the persecutors. The pendulum swung completely in the other direction, from positive complicity in this violence to negative complicity through the rumbling. So while she thinks that she will ultimately stop the cycle of violence by killing the world, she's ultimately continuing it. That's the role that Eren plays. But most of all, Nelson, you hit on this so, oh my God. He communicates it to himself. Through the coordinate, he travels back in time to cause the Titan that killed his mother in front of him, to basically motivate him to exact vengeance against the Titan, to kill his mother in front of him. The cycle of violence he began is tautological. It has no true beginning and no true end. It's an Ouroboros. It's a self-consuming serpent. So the cycle of violence that he caused has no beginning and no end. It's a constant cycle of violence. This mimetic contagion that's constantly feeding into itself, a constant feedback loop. It's him as the serpent eating itself. That's the role that Eren Yeager plays. So, but it transcends time in the way that we saw him communicating that violence, that drive to fight back to Grisha, his own father, to take the founding titan in the past. So the point that I'm trying to belabor here is Eren Yeager failed to see what was that the world, that destroying the world to save the scapegoat, so Ymir, but also his people, the Eldians, was the ultimate proof that the world was right to fear the scapegoat. So as you saw in the end, the Jaegerists became like a North Korean military regime, right? The cycle of violence always continues on no matter what. So Eren Yeager failed to see that in trying to stop the cycle of violence forcefully through violence, he was perpetuating it. So violence always wins in the end. This idea of freedom, his desire, his drive to be free from violence and free will was an illusion, enslaving him to his own resentment against the world. So that's why he points across the sea. If we kill our enemies, will we finally be free? The answer is no. You are not going to be free if you kill your enemies, because there will be more enemies that will seek revenge to you. That's the role Eren Yeager plays. He's the serpent that consumes itself. Anyway, I'm sorry. I went on a ramble in there. Nelson, Gabe, you want to jump in, please?
Very passionate. I enjoyed it.
I love listening to that passionate yelling of how Eren Yeager is
Right.
Is right. Oh, gosh.
is right, is wrong, everything in between.
It's not just that Eren Yeager is right. It's that Eren Yeager is right because he's right because he's right because he's right because he's right. because he's wrong. That's that cycle that keeps perpetuating itself. He caused the cycle to happen by motivating himself to basically send that Titan to kill his mom in front of him so that he could continue the cycle of violence. So
It was always meant to be like that.
It was always meant to be like that. It's mimetic violence through this Girardian paradigm is self-causing, is self-communicating, and he communicates it to everyone, and it redefines their paradigm of existence. So ultimately, then, what do we take away from this? Right? Do we take this? What is the ultimate takeaway from the show, if not a nihilistic perspective? Right? Nelson, Gabe, what do you think you guys took away from this show, if nothing else? How did it make you feel?
Made me feel hollow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
I think. Go ahead, sir.
No, you go. I was going nowhere.
I think it just goes to show you that violence is always existing, no
Mm-hmm.
matter who you are, where you are, what part of the story you find yourself in or factor into. Violence is something that cannot not exist
Mm-hmm.
when
So
there's
long,
more than two people.
yeah, so long as there's someone who desires power, this pagan desire for power, there will always be violence. And this pagan desire transcends the gods of the old world, the gods of the Aztecs, the gods of the Greeks, the gods of the Vikings, the gods of South African tribes, gods of Australians. The pagan desire for power is what motivated these gods in the first place. The scapegoats to be deified. That desire for power is pagan. That's my takeaway from the show. And so, my takeaway from this is the way that the show played around with a perspective that eventually leads to violence, to scapegoating. And one of the more the way it's bittersweet and kind of ambivalent. Kind of an ambivalent ending to the show because obviously you get that North Korean Jaegers regime that happens and all, and the that kid who in the post-apocalypse finds that tree and presumably finds the founding titan where Eren Yeager's head is buried. My takeaway is the liberation of Eldia and the victory over the cycle of violence is ultimately the vindication of Ymir's legacy. So the Ymir was enslaved to King Fritz's will through her own love for him, right? And the way that the show ended for me was that the only way to free her was if Mikasa, who was Eren Yeager's love interest, and also a scout, who was one of the principal protagonists of the show, had to let go of her own love for Eren, who perpetuates the cycle of violence. So the only way to free her, free Ymir, was for Mikasa to let go of the same love that Ymir had for King Fritz. That the love that she had for Eren Yeager was obviously different from the love that Ymir had for King Fritz. But ultimately, the similar strain there was that it was blind and it was completely devotional, and she had to look beyond her own blind devotion to Eren Yeager and basically put that aside and kill the only thing that in her life that meant anything, save the world. And she killed her world to save the world. That's what Mikasa did. And Ymir saved her world and basically condemned the world. So that's where the shift happened. And Mikasa killing Eren basically set Ymir free from her love of King Fritz, which was that desire that basically caused this whole thing in the first place, that led to this cycle of tragedy and violence down throughout the ages. And so I would say Mikasa's sacrifice of her ego to basically killing Eren Yeager, this devil who was causing all this violence in the world, basically perpetuating the mimetic contagion, is somewhat similar, I'd say, to the way that Jesus sacrificed his own ego to basically liberate all of humankind. This is the point that Girard makes in his book, The Scapegoat, that Jesus, the gospel revelation, the passion narrative in the gospels, is unique in all, it sets apart from all the pagan religions of the world and all the religions of the world, because the scapegoat in this narrative, Jesus, is neither positive or negatively complicit in the perspective of his persecutors. He doesn't condemn, but he doesn't agree with the fact that he has to be murdered. But he knows that it's going to happen anyway, because that's the way that the human nature works. And this lack of a positive or negative complicit perspective of their persecutors for the foundations of a religion is what leads to the complete revelation of the scapegoat mechanisms in the Gospels, which leads to the moral axiom of the Western world to shift from power to love. And so Mikasa set aside her love of Eren and her basically ego to save Eren, for to basically save the world. She had this general love of the world, general love of everyone, and she had to save the world. Otherwise, Eren Yeager was going to destroy it. She knew that this guy couldn't go on with it, right? So you have to move beyond the perspective of the persecutor. Be not positively or negatively complicit. Don't say that you deserve the violence perpetuated against yourself, and don't condemn the violence that's being perpetuated against you either. Just acknowledge that it's there, and engage with your persecutors, not with hatred, not with fear, but with love. So anyway, that's my main takeaway of the show, Attack on Titan. So guys, you have any other things you want to say? Nelson, Gabe? I know I've been doing most of the talking. I'm sorry. I'm very passionate about Girard. Yeah.
Do not be sorry, my friend.
No, please, guys, jump in. Anything else you guys want to say? Anything you want to add?
Love is a prison, and I think Ymir and Mikasa perfectly demonstrate it.
Mm-hmm.
Two sides of the same coin.
Not love, but desire. But anyway, point
Not
being
love,
said.
but blind devotion.
Exactly. Yeah, so that's pretty much all I have to say. I hope you guys came away with a new understanding of either Attack on Titan or René Girard. I'm not just talking to you guys, but also chat. Not that there's anyone in the chat. So, yeah. Yeah, it's going up on YouTube.
Hell yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Beautiful.
So, guys, thank you very much for tuning in. And if you have any questions about Girard's thought, any ambiguities, or anything that you'd like to add about Attack on Titan to this Girardian lens, please feel free to leave it in the comments below. And until next time, I don't know what I'm going to talk about next time, but stay safe and stay groovy. Peace out.
I love you, Paul.
Likewise.
What a closing. What was that thing you said at the end? Stay groovy?
Stay groovy.